Grease under Maya Rodriguez's fingernails told the same story every day. Transmission fluid from Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick, motor oil from the sheriff's patrol car, and the stubborn hydraulic fluid that seemed to find its way into every crevice of her weathered hands. At 28, she had been running Rodriguez Auto Repair for 6 years, ever since her father passed and left her the small cinder block building on the outskirts of Cedar Falls, Montana. Population 1,947, where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were supposed to be impossible to keep. But Maya Rodriguez was living proof that even in a town where gossip traveled faster than wildfire, some truths could remain buried deeper than the deepest oil change pit. Every morning at 6:30 sharp, she would unlock the heavy metal door of her garage, flip on the fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered like dying insects, and lose herself in the honest work of fixing things that were broken. There was something pure about it, the way an engine either ran or it didn't, the way problems had solutions if you just knew where to look, the way her hands seemed to understand the language of metal and machinery in a way that made perfect sense when nothing else in the world did. The townspeople had grown accustomed to Maya's quiet competence. She could diagnose a transmission problem by the sound it made pulling into her lot, could rebuild an engine with her eyes closed, and somehow always managed to fix vehicles for less than anyone expected to pay. Old-timers would nod approvingly and say she had her father's gift, though Maya knew the truth was more complicated than genetics. Her skills had been forged in places far from Cedar Falls, under circumstances that would have shattered the peaceful illusions of her neighbors. Cedar Falls was the kind of town where the biggest excitement was usually the annual Harvest Festival or the occasional bear sighting near the elementary school. People left their doors unlocked, kids rode their bikes, until dark without worry, and the most dangerous thing most folks encountered was black ice on Highway 12 during winter. Maya had chosen this place deliberately, drawn to its sleepy predictability like a moth to flame, except in reverse. She was seeking darkness, anonymity, the blessed ordinariness of a life where no one asked too many questions about where she'd learned to field strip an M4 carbine or why she sometimes woke up screaming in the middle of the night. Her daily routine was sacred in its simplicity. Coffee at 5:30, black and strong enough to strip paint. A quick scan of the weather and road conditions on her phone. Old habits died hard, and situational awareness was something you never really unlearned. She'd check the locks on her garage, inspect the security cameras she'd installed herself, and told curious neighbors were for insurance purposes, and then begin the methodical process of bringing broken machines back to life. The locals had their theories about Maya Rodriguez, of course. Some whispered she'd been in the military. There was something about the way she held herself, the way her eyes tracked movement, the way she could lift an engine block without breaking a sweat. Others figured she'd learned her trade in the big city before coming home to small-town life, though no one could quite remember her family being from around here originally. The most romantic among them imagined a tragic love story, a woman fleeing heartbreak to start over in the mountains of Montana. None of them came close to the truth. The truth was classified at levels that would make a Pentagon lawyer nervous. The truth was buried in mission reports that officially didn't exist, in operations that had taken place in countries whose names couldn't be spoken aloud, in a past where Maya Rodriguez had been someone else entirely, someone whose job description included words like elimination, infiltration, and plausible deniability. Someone who had learned to fix engines not in her father's garage, but in forward operating bases where keeping vehicles running was the difference between completing the mission and coming home in a body bag. Maya had been part of something that existed in the gray spaces between official military units and intelligence agencies, something that recruited from the best of the best and then made them better, sharper, more lethal. She had been a ghost in the machine of American foreign policy, a problem solver for problems that couldn't be solved through conventional means. And when it all went wrong, spectacularly, horrifically wrong, she had vanished as completely as smoke, reinventing herself as thoroughly as a CIA cover identity, except this time it was real. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Maya was elbow-deep in the engine compartment of a Ford pickup, chasing down an intermittent electrical issue that had been plaguing the vehicle for weeks when she heard the distinctive rumble of diesel engines approaching. Heavy vehicles, multiple axles, the kind of sound that made her combat-trained instincts prick up like a guard dog catching an unfamiliar scent. She didn't look up immediately. That would have been too obvious, too revealing. Instead, she continued working while tracking the sounds with the part of her mind that never truly rested, the part that had kept her alive in places where being careless for even a moment meant never coming home. The engine stopped outside her garage. Car doors slammed with military precision. Not the casual bang of civilian vehicles, but the controlled closure of people who had been trained to minimize noise and maximize efficiency. Maya's hands never stopped moving on the Ford's wiring, harness, but every muscle in her body had shifted into a state of coiled readiness that she hadn't experienced in 6 years. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice was polite but carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Maya finally looked up, wiping her hands on a shop rag with deliberate casualness, and found herself looking at 10 of the most dangerous men she had ever encountered outside of her previous life. They weren't wearing uniforms, but everything about them screamed military special operations. The way they positioned themselves to cover all exits and angles, the subtle bulges under their civilian clothing that indicated concealed weapons, the 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing and doing things that ordinary people couldn't imagine. But it was their faces that sent ice water through her veins, because she recognized them. Not all of them, but enough. Faces from briefings, from mission photographs, from the kind of classified files that were supposed to be destroyed after reading. These weren't just any special operations soldiers. These were Navy SEALs from DevGru, Development Group, the unit so secret that officially it didn't exist, the men who handled the missions that other special operations forces considered too dangerous or too sensitive. And somehow, impossibly, they had found her in Cedar Falls, Montana. The leader stepped forward, and Maya's blood turned to liquid nitrogen. Commander Jake Reaper Morrison. She'd know that scarred jawline and those predator's eyes anywhere. The last time she'd seen him, he'd been zip-tied to a chair in a black site interrogation room in Romania, blood streaming from a head wound she'd given him, screaming her real name as she'd walked away from the worst mistake of her military career. That had been 8 years ago. 8 years since Operation Nightfall had gone sideways and left half their joint task force dead in a Syrian mountain pass. "Hello, Viper," Morrison said quietly, using the call sign that legally no longer existed. Or should I say, Maya Rodriguez, small-town mechanic. The shop rag in her hands became very still. Around Morrison, the other SEALs had spread out with practiced efficiency. Not threatening exactly, but positioned in a way that suggested leaving wasn't going to be as simple as walking to her truck. Maya recognized the tactical formation from her own training, back when she'd been the one, hunting ghosts instead of trying to become one. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Maya said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "I'm just a mechanic, born and raised in Montana." The lie came easily. She'd been practicing it for 6 years, after all. But even as she spoke, she was calculating distances, cataloging potential weapons. Tire iron by the wall, acetylene torch on the workbench, the Glock 19 hidden in the bottom drawer of her desk, and running through exit strategies that would have impressed her old tactical instructors. Morrison smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Cute. Really selling the whole innocent small-town girl routine. He pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. "But we both know you're Captain Elena Vasquez, formerly of the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, on loan to Task Force Shadowblade before you went rogue and disappeared after the clusterfuck in Aleppo." The name hit her like a physical blow. Elena Vasquez had been buried deeper than Jimmy Hoffa, erased from every database, every record, every official acknowledgement that she'd ever existed. The fact that Morrison knew her, meant that someone with access to the blackest of black files had sent him here. Someone who wanted Elena Vasquez found badly enough to risk exposing DevGru operators in a civilian environment. 8 years, Maya said, abandoning the pretense. There was no point in maintaining the charade now. These men had resources that could peel back layers of false identity like an onion. 8 years I've been dead and buried. What could possibly be important enough to dig up a ghost? Your former partner, Morrison said, and Maya's world tilted sideways. Marcus Kane. Ring. Any bells? The acetylene torch suddenly seemed very far away. Marcus Kane, call sign Prophet, had been her spotter, her backup, her closest friend, and eventually something much more complicated than either of them had been willing to admit. He'd also been the reason Operation Nightfall had gone to hell, though Maya had spent 6 years trying to convince herself that what happened in that Syrian bunker hadn't been his fault. Marcus is dead, Maya said flatly. I watched him die. Syrian Republican guard put 3 rounds in his chest and threw him off a cliff. I barely got out myself. That's what everyone thought, said the SEAL to Morrison's left, a compact man with intelligent eyes and premature gray at his temples. Including us, until 3 weeks ago when he walked into the American embassy in Bucharest with intelligence about a terrorist cell planning to hit targets on American soil. Except there's a problem. Maya waited, though every instinct screamed. At her to run, to fight, to do anything except stand there and let these ghosts from her past drag her back into a world she'd died trying to escape. The problem, Morrison continued, is that according to our intelligence analysts, Marcus Kane has been working for the other side for the past 5 years. Syrian intelligence, Iranian Quds Force, maybe even Russian SVR. We're not sure yet. What we do know is that he's been feeding information to people who have used it to kill American soldiers and intelligence assets. The garage suddenly felt too small, too confined. Maya's carefully constructed world, her simple life of fixing engines and avoiding complications, was crumbling around her like a controlled demolition. That's impossible. Marcus would never betray his country? Sell out his fellow operators? Morrison's voice was hard as steel. The evidence says otherwise. 15 American deaths directly traceable to intelligence leaks that match his operational knowledge. 3 safe houses blown. 2 deep cover assets executed in their beds. Maya's hands were shaking now, and she clenched them into fists to hide it. What does this have to do with me? I've been out of the game for 6 years. I'm nobody. You're the only person alive who knew Marcus Kane well enough to predict his next move, said another SEAL, this one tall and lean with the kind of tan that came from spending time in desert climates. And according to the intelligence he brought to Bucharest, he's planning something big, something that's going to happen in the next 72 hours, something that's going to make 9/11 look like a warm-up act. Maya felt the world spinning around her like she was trapped in a centrifuge. You want me to help you find him? We want you to help us stop him, Morrison corrected, because there's one more thing you need to know about your old boyfriend's intelligence dump. The target isn't some random American city or military base. It's personal. He's coming for you, Elena, and he's planning to take out everyone and everything in a 50-mile radius when he does it. The fluorescent lights above hummed and flickered, casting strange shadows across the garage floor. Outside, Maya could hear the normal sounds of Cedar Falls going about its business, children playing in the park across the street, Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick coughing to life, the afternoon freight train rumbling through on its way to Seattle. All of it suddenly felt fragile, like a soap bubble balanced on the edge of a razor blade. Why would he come for me? Maya asked, though part of her already knew the answer, had been dreading it for 6 years. Morrison's expression softened slightly, and for a moment she caught a glimpse of the man she'd once known, before the failed. Missions and classified disasters had hardened them both into something barely recognizable as human. Because he knows what really happened in Aleppo, Elena. He knows why you left him to die, and he knows that you've been hiding something from everyone, including us." Maya's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The nuclear material," Morrison said quietly. "The enriched uranium that went missing from that Syrian facility. The stuff that was supposed to be destroyed but somehow vanished right around the time you disappeared. The stuff that intelligence agencies on 3 continents have been looking for ever since." The shop rag fell from Maya's nerveless fingers. Around her, the 10 most dangerous men in the American military waited for her answer, and Maya realized that her 6-year vacation from hell was officially over. The past had found her, just like she'd always known it would, and it was carrying enough nuclear material to turn her quiet little town into a crater visible from space. Maya closed her eyes and felt the weight of 6 years of carefully constructed lies settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. When she opened them again, the frightened mechanic was gone, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. The woman who had earned the call sign Viper not for her beauty, but for her ability to strike without warning and disappear without a trace. "The uranium was never stolen," she said quietly. "It was relocated." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Relocated where?" "Somewhere safe. Somewhere no terrorist, no rogue state, no arms dealer would ever think to look." Maya straightened, and suddenly the oil-stained coveralls looked less like work, clothes, and more like camouflage. "I didn't betray my country, Commander. I saved it from making the biggest mistake in its history." The gray-haired SEAL, she remembered him now, Lieutenant Commander David Ghost Patterson from Team 6, stepped forward. "You're going to need to explain that, because from where we're sitting, you went rogue with enough enriched uranium to level downtown Manhattan." Maya walked to her workbench, moving slowly so none of the SEALs would interpret it as aggressive action. She opened the bottom drawer and withdrew a small leather journal, its pages yellowed with age and stained with what looked suspiciously like blood. Operation Nightfall wasn't a seek and destroy mission. It was a recovery operation. Syrian intelligence had gotten their hands on weapons-grade uranium from a Pakistani scientist who'd gone rogue. Our job was to secure the material and bring it back for proper disposal. She opened the journal to a page covered in her own handwriting. Mission notes, tactical observations, and something that made Morrison's face go pale when he saw it. Except the disposal site wasn't going to be some secure facility in Nevada. It was going to be a false flag operation. Plant the uranium in an Iranian facility, then discover it during a routine inspection. Instant justification for regime change in Tehran. "That's impossible," said one of the younger SEALs, a man whose face still carried the idealism that got beaten out of operators after their first few classified disasters. "American forces don't conduct false flag operations against—" "Kid," Maya interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much and lived to regret it. "There are black-budget operations that make waterboarding look like a church picnic. Task Force Shadowblade answered to people whose names aren't in any government directory. People who think the Constitution is more of a guideline than a rule." Morrison was studying the journal pages with the intensity of a man reading his own death warrant. "These mission parameters, they're not what we were briefed on." "Because you weren't supposed to survive the mission," Maya said bluntly. "None of us were. The plan was for Syrian forces to eliminate the joint task force after we'd secured the uranium, leaving behind just enough evidence to suggest we'd been betrayed by Iranian intelligence. Posthumous heroes, tragic loss, and all the justification needed for a war that would have killed millions." The garage fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of children playing. Maya could see the wheels turning, behind Morrison's eyes, connecting dots that painted a picture none of them wanted to see. She'd carried this truth alone for 6 years, and part of her was almost relieved to finally share the burden. "Marcus figured it out first," she continued. 3 days into the mission, he intercepted communications between our handlers and Syrian intelligence. We were being set up, sold out by our own people to create a casus belli. When he tried to contact command, he was told to maintain radio silence and continue the mission. "So you went rogue," Patterson said, and there was something like respect in his voice now. "We tried to extract with the uranium, but the Syrians were ready for us. Someone had given them our exact route, our contingency plans, everything." Maya's voice caught slightly. "Marcus took 3 rounds covering my escape. I watched him fall off that cliff and I thought I was the only one who knew the truth." She reached into the drawer again and withdrew a small electronic device that looked like a modified satellite phone. "But apparently, I was wrong about a lot of things, including whether Marcus was actually dead." Morrison stared at the device. "Is that a direct communication link to Prophet? We established it as an emergency backup during the mission, encrypted through 3 different military satellites. I've kept it powered and monitored for 6 years, just in case." Maya's finger hovered over a switch. "If Marcus is really alive, if he's really planning what you say he's planning, then this is the only way to reach him." "And if it's a trap?" asked the tall tan SEAL. "Then we're all dead anyway," Maya replied matter-of-factly. "Because if Marcus has really gone rogue, if he's working for the people we were supposed to stop, then he knows things about American special operations that could compromise every covert mission for the next decade. This little town will be the least of our problems." She activated the device and a small screen flickered to life. Lines of encrypted text began scrolling past. Authentication codes, security protocols, the digital handshake that would either connect her to her former partner or announce their location to every hostile intelligence service in the hemisphere. The device chirped softly, and a familiar voice filled the garage, distorted by encryption but unmistakably Marcus Kane. "Hello, Elena. I was wondering when you'd finally turn that on." Maya's hand trembled slightly as she lifted the device. "Hello, Prophet. Heard you were dead." "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated," Marcus replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice, the same warm, slightly cocky smile that had gotten them both through a dozen impossible missions. "Though I have to say, the rumors of your peaceful retirement in small-town USA were apparently understated." Morrison gestured sharply, and Maya nodded. She understood. Keep him talking, get intelligence, find out what he was really planning. "The SEALs here seem to think you've gone over to the dark side. Please tell me they're wrong." The pause stretched long enough that Maya began to wonder if the connection had been lost. When Marcus finally spoke again, his voice was different. Harder, colder, carrying an edge she'd never heard before. "Wrong. Elena, everything we believed was wrong. Everything we fought for, everything we nearly died for. It was all lies. Do you have any idea what I've learned in the past 5 years? What I've discovered about the people we used to serve?" "Enlighten me," Maya said, catching Morrison's eye. He was recording the conversation, she realized, probably transmitting it back to whoever had sent them. "The uranium we secured in Syria. It didn't come from Pakistan. It came from American stockpiles, sold to Syrian intelligence by the same people who sent us to retrieve it. The whole operation was a shell game, Elena. We were never the good guys. We were just the pawns who didn't know we were being sacrificed." Maya felt her world shift again, like standing on a ship in heavy seas. "That's impossible, is it? Think about it, Elena. How did Syrian intelligence know exactly where to hit us? How did they know our extraction routes, our safe houses, our backup plans? Someone with access to the highest levels of American intelligence sold us out. And when I started digging, when I started asking the wrong questions to the wrong people, I learned that Operation Nightfall was just the tip of the iceberg." The device crackled with static, and when Marcus spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made Maya's chest tighten with recognition. It was the voice of someone who'd seen too much truth and been broken by it. "They killed our entire unit. Elena. Everyone except you and me. Patterson, Williams, Rodriguez, Kim. All of them eliminated over the past 5 years. Car accidents, training mishaps, medical emergencies. Very clean, very professional, very untraceable. But I noticed the pattern. Maya looked at the seals surrounding her, suddenly seeing them in a different light. Were they here to protect her, or to finish what had been started in Syria? Morrison's expression was unreadable, but she caught something in his eyes that might have been surprise, or might have been guilt. "So what now, Prophet?" she asked. "What's this big plan that has everyone so worried?" "Now? Now I'm going to expose them all. The Shadowblade files, the uranium trafficking, the false flag operations, the assassinations, all of it. I've got evidence that will bring down everyone from Pentagon desk jockeys to sitting senators, and I'm going to make sure the whole world sees what American freedom really looks like. And the nuclear material? The threat to Cedar Falls?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The only threat to your little town is the same thing that's been hunting both of us for 6 years. Our own government. They sent those SEALs to bring you in, Elena, but not to help you. They're there to clean up loose ends." Maya's blood turned to ice as she realized what Marcus was suggesting. She looked around the garage, seeing the tactical positions of the SEALs with new eyes. They weren't protecting her. They were containing her. "The uranium," she whispered into the device. "Marcus, where is the uranium?" "Safe," he replied. "Hidden where only you and I can find it. And that's exactly why they can never let either of us live." The device went dead, and in the sudden silence, Maya heard the distinctive sound of safeties being switched off on multiple weapons. Morrison's expression had shifted from professional courtesy to something much more dangerous. "Well," he said quietly, "I guess that answers that question." Maya's combat instincts kicked in before her conscious mind had fully processed the threat. 6 years of peaceful mechanic work hadn't dulled the reflexes that had kept her alive in a dozen war zones. They'd just been sleeping, waiting for exactly this moment. As the first SEAL began to raise his weapon, Maya was already moving, diving behind the engine block of the Ford pickup while her hand found the acetylene torch on the workbench. "Light them up," Morrison barked, but his order was cut short by the brilliant blue flame that erupted from Maya's position, forcing the SEALs to scatter as she swept the torch in a wide arc. The enclosed space of the garage became a tactical nightmare. Too many obstacles, too little room to maneuver, an opponent who knew the terrain better than they did. Maya rolled under the pickup truck, the torch flame singing the hair off Morrison's arm as she passed. She'd done this dance before, in tighter spaces and against worse odds. The key was to keep moving, never stay in one position long enough for them to coordinate their fire and use every advantage the environment provided. "She's heading for the back exit," someone shouted, but Maya had already anticipated that assumption. Instead of running for the rear door, she popped up behind the air compressor and triggered the emergency release valve. The sudden, explosive hiss of pressurized air created a momentary diversion, and in that split second of confusion, Maya's hand found the Glock 19 she'd hidden in her desk drawer 6 years ago and never quite forgotten about. The first shot took out the overhead lights, plunging the garage into semi-darkness broken only by the afternoon sunlight streaming through the front windows. The second shot put a hole in the air compressor tank, creating a cloud of mechanical debris that turned the already chaotic space into a three-dimensional maze of flying metal and hissing gas. "Federal agents, cease fire, cease fire." The voice came from outside the garage, amplified by a megaphone and carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Maya risked a glance through the front window and felt her heart sink. Black SUVs, tactical teams, snipers on the rooftops across the street. Someone had called in the cavalry, and her little auto repair shop was now the center of a full-scale federal operation. Morrison's voice cut through the chaos from somewhere near the front of the garage. "Stand down, Viper. It doesn't have to. End this way, doesn't it?" Maya called back, keeping the torch flame between her and the SEAL positions. "How many more accidents were you planning to arrange? How many more loose ends needed tying up?" "You don't understand the bigger picture," Morrison replied. and there was something almost pleading in his voice now. The uranium, the false flag operations, all of it. It's not what you think. We're trying to prevent something worse. Maya laughed, but there was no humor in it. Worse than starting a war based on planted evidence? Worse than assassinating American soldiers to cover up war crimes? Please enlighten me about this bigger picture. The uranium you and Kane secured wasn't just weapons-grade material, said Patterson, his voice coming from near the side door. It was a prototype, a new kind of enrichment process developed in Pakistani black sites with North Korean technology. If that process gets out, if countries like Iran or Syria figure out how to replicate it, they could have nuclear weapons in months instead of years. Maya processed this information while keeping track of the SEAL positions by sound. So, you decided to plant it in Iran to justify bombing their nuclear facilities? We decided to make sure it never saw daylight again, Morrison corrected. The false flag operation was never about starting a war. It was about creating the political cover necessary to completely destroy every trace of that technology. Sometimes you have to let people believe a small lie to prevent a catastrophic truth. And all the assassinations, all the dead operators, weren't supposed to happen, said a new voice, and Maya's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice, had heard it in her nightmares for 6 years. Colonel James Mitchell, the handler who'd sent Task Force Shadowblade into Syria, was standing in the doorway of her garage like a ghost made flesh. "Hello, Elena," Mitchell said, his silver hair catching the afternoon light. "You've led us quite a chase." Maya kept the torch flame steady, but her mind was reeling. Mitchell was supposed to be dead, killed in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Except here he was, very much alive and apparently still pulling strings from whatever shadow organization had replaced Task Force Shadowblade. "Let me guess," Maya said. "Another training accident that wasn't really an accident?" "Something like that." Mitchell stepped into the garage, seemingly unconcerned about the weapon in Maya's hand or the fact that 10 heavily armed SEALs were positioned between them. "The truth is, Elena, we've been protecting you. You and Kane both. The people who wanted you eliminated. The real architects of Operation Nightfall. They've been hunting you for years. Every accident, every assassination of your former teammates. It was us getting to them first. Protecting us from who? From the people who sold American uranium to Syrian intelligence in the first place. From the defense contractors who were going to profit from the war with Iran. From the politicians who staked their careers on that conflict happening." Mitchell's expression was grim. "You think the American government is some monolithic entity? But the truth is much more complicated. There are factions, Elena. Groups within groups, all fighting for control of the narrative." Maya's torch hand wavered slightly. "You're saying you're the good guys? I'm saying we're the lesser evil. The people hunting you don't care about preventing nuclear proliferation. They care about profit margins and political power. If they'd gotten their hands on that Pakistani technology, they'd have sold it to the highest bidder, war or no war. And Marcus, is he really planning a terrorist attack?" Mitchell's expression darkened. "Marcus Kane is a broken man consumed by paranoia and revenge. 5 years ago, we tried to bring him in, to explain the situation, to offer him the same protection we've been providing you. Instead, he disappeared into the intelligence underground, making contact with Russian SVR, Iranian Quds Force, anyone who could give him the resources to wage war against the American government. So he has gone rogue. He's gone insane," Patterson interjected from his position near the side wall. "The intelligence he brought to Bucharest wasn't about preventing attacks. It was reconnaissance for planning them. He's been feeding information to hostile intelligence services for years, and now he's ready to escalate to direct action." Maya's mind was spinning, trying to process layers of deception and counter-deception that made her 6 years of hiding seem like child's play. The nuclear material. He said only he and I know where it is. Which is why we need your help, Morrison said. The uranium you secured in Syria, all 73 kilograms of it, is still out there somewhere. Kane has been trying to locate it for years, and according to our intelligence, he's finally found it. 73 kilograms? Maya's voice was barely a whisper. That's enough to level half of Montana. Or to build a dozen dirty bombs that could contaminate American cities for decades, Mitchell added. Kane isn't planning a conventional terrorist attack, Elena. He's planning to detonate that material in major population centers and blame it on Iranian sleeper cells. His version of exposing the truth, by creating the very disaster that Operation Nightfall was supposed to prevent. The torch in Maya's hand suddenly felt very heavy. Around her, the garage that had been her sanctuary for 6 years seemed to shrink, pressing in on her like a tomb. Everything she'd believed, everything she'd sacrificed, every choice she'd made since that night in Syria, all of it was crumbling around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. Where? She asked quietly. Where what? Where did I hide the uranium? Mitchell smiled grimly. That's what we were hoping you could tell us. Because according to every intelligence analysis we've conducted, you're the only person who knows the exact location. And if Kane gets there first... Maya closed her eyes and felt the weight of 6 years of carefully buried memories pressing against her consciousness like water behind a cracking dam. She'd hidden the uranium somewhere safe. Somewhere no one would think to look, somewhere that even she had tried to forget. But now, with the lives of millions hanging in the balance, she had no choice but to remember. I need guarantees, she said, opening her eyes to meet Mitchell's gaze. Protection for the people of this town. New identities for anyone who gets caught in the crossfire. And a promise that when this is over, when Kane is stopped and the uranium is secure, I get to disappear again. Permanently. Done, Mitchell said without hesitation. Maya looked around the garage one last time, at the Ford pickup with its half-repaired engine, at the tools that had become extensions of her hands, at the simple, honest life she was about to abandon. Forever. Then she dropped the torch and lowered her weapon. The uranium is buried under the Little League baseball field, she said quietly. Home plate, specifically. I figured it was the one place in America that would never be disturbed, never be developed, never be forgotten. The most sacred ground in any small town. Morrison was already on his radio, coordinating with tactical teams and bomb disposal units. Mitchell nodded approvingly, as if her choice of hiding place confirmed something he'd suspected all along. There's just one problem, Maya continued, and something in her tone made every seal in the garage freeze. I didn't bury it in Cedar Falls. I buried it under the Little League field in my hometown, the place I told everyone I was from but never actually visited. She smiled grimly at the sudden realization dawning on their faces. Marcus knew I would lie about where I was from. He knew I would create a false background, a fake hometown, a completely fabricated identity. But he also knew that when I chose a place to hide something that important, I'd hide it somewhere that meant something. To me. Somewhere real. Where? Mitchell's voice was deadly quiet. Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Population 847. About 30 miles from where Marcus Kane grew up. Maya's smile turned predatory. Which means he's not trying to find the uranium at all. He's already found it. He's been sitting on it for weeks, maybe months, waiting for exactly this moment. The silence in the garage was broken only by the distant sound of children playing in the park across the street. Maya realized that in about 60 seconds, those children would be evacuated. Their parents would be questioned by federal agents, and her quiet little town would be crawling with more firepower than most small countries possessed. There's something else you need to know, she said, pulling out her cell phone and showing them the screen. I've been getting text messages for the past 3 days. Anonymous numbers, encrypted, but I recognize the pattern from our old communication protocols. Morrison leaned forward to read the messages, and his face went white. These are coordinates. 12 major American cities, Maya confirmed. New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Philadelphia, Phoenix, San Antonio, San Diego, Dallas, San Jose, Austin, and Jacksonville. Each message sent exactly 12 hours apart, each containing the precise GPS coordinates for the city center. A countdown, Patterson breathed. A countdown that ends in exactly 6 hours, Maya said, checking her watch. Whatever Marcus is planning, whatever point he's trying to make, it happens at midnight Eastern Time. And if I know Marcus Kane, if I know the man I used to love, he's not bluffing. Mitchell was already barking orders into his radio, coordinating with Homeland Security, the FBI, the Pentagon, and probably half a dozen other agencies whose acronyms Maya didn't recognize. The small-town mechanic's life she'd built was officially over, but for the first time in 6 years, Maya Rodriguez felt like herself again. She was Viper, the ghost who struck without warning and disappeared without a trace. And tonight, she was going to hunt the most dangerous prey of her career, the man who'd once been her partner, her lover, and her closest friend. The man who now held the power to turn 12 American cities into radioactive wastelands. The war that had started in a Syrian bunker 6 years ago was finally coming home, and Maya was the only one who could stop it. She just hoped she remembered how to be the killer she used to be, because Marcus Kane certainly hadn't forgotten how to be Prophet, the man who could see the future and bend it to his will. And right now, the future he was planning looked like the end of everything she'd ever tried to protect.